Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the general session, Creating the Future of Skills Development Through Technology and Collaboration. I'm Sandra DeCastro with IMS, and I will serve as your host today. We have a great panel of speakers lined up for you, and I'll turn it over to Carol Gravel, who will be the moderator. But first, I just wanted to go through the information about the Q&A. All participants have the ability to submit a question via the attendee website. So you need to log in. If you have not already done so, navigate to this session in the attendee website, and then you will see an icon that you can click on and be able to submit questions. We will be moderating I will be watching the questions as they come in, and Carol has reserved some time at the end for us to go through those questions and answer as many as we possibly can. So with that, I turn it over to Carol.
Sandra, thank you so much. Everybody, welcome. I'm coming to you from Carolina Beach, North Carolina today. I'm the CEO of Binnacle Consulting, where we help corporations and collegiate organizations navigate 21st century talent and learning. A little bit of background of myself, and then I really want to spend time introducing the panel so you can have good conversations with them. A little bit of background of myself, the reason why we help folks navigate the corporate and collegiate space. I have a corporate background. I worked at Fidelity Investments, Liberty Mutual Insurance Company, and Global Knowledge for several years. I have a collegiate background. I was a professor and now an adjunct faculty member at colleges and universities in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and North Carolina. My focus is on HR and talent and learning. And I have a doctorate degree in instructional technology. In a consulting space, this is my second consulting company. The Binnacle Consulting is my passion because it does do that component of bridging the gap between a corporate and collegiate areas. So I have that passion, but I also like sailing, i.e. why I live in North Carolina. So let me introduce you to our distinguished panel. First up is Marcia Carver. She is coming to you from Memphis, Tennessee. Maria is the Managing Director of Development, Innovation, and Organizational Strategy at FedEx. In that capacity, Tamara leads the global learning function. That includes a lot of things, wait for this, leadership, organizational effectiveness solutions, performance management, employee engagement, talent, training technology, data analytics, and QDM, quality-driven management. Tamara's passion and focus is on effective processes and standards to ensure high-quality solutions. Next up is Greg Giangrande. He is coming to you from New York City. He is the Chief People Officer at Elysion. Elysion is the market-leading global ed tech company, which is really focused on powering the future of higher education. Greg leads all aspects of the organization, including employee experience, talent acquisition, diversity, equity inclusion, learning and development, internal communications. He's also held senior leadership roles at McKinsey and news organizations such as Time Inc., the Wall Street Journal, as well as Dow Jones. Greg has several passions. We just needed to pick one, and one of those is his Go to Greg career advice, where he writes a column for the New York Post. And the New York Post, if you're not familiar, is the nation's 4th largest daily circulation newspaper. Our third distinguished guest is Patty Finch. She has her PhD. She is from Washington, D.C. area. She is the Director of Technical Development with the Engineering and Sciences sector of Northrop Grumman in the Mission Systems area. Patty is responsible for the strategy, talent development, and resources for over 16,000 people in the engineering and services sector. The programs she provides fosters a high-performing workforce while also sustaining that excellence that Northrop Grumman is known for. And if that wasn't enough, she also helps to drive innovation in engineering. Patty's focus and passion is on bridging the knowledge gap in organizations, and interestingly enough, so passionate, that's what she got her doctorate degree in. Last but not least is our friend Ian Davidson. He is coming to you from Los Angeles. He is the Vice President of Business Development at ZipRecruiter. As a Vice President of Business Development at ZipRecruiter, Ian's focus is on partnerships that build a better knowledge marketplace that helps employers find the best talent more effectively, and also helps job seekers market themselves to employees to land that next great job. Ian's passion is all about technology, and his focus is on creating a power talent marketplaces to help job seekers navigate their careers. So if you have a plethora of information and resources at your disposal, so here's how we're going to kind of look at this. You have looked at a lot of different sessions in this particular summit. You've seen feedback from a corporate perspective and a collegiate perspective. This is your unique opportunity to talk to senior leaders in both sectors. We're going to have a good section of time to have Q&A. So the way that we're going to work this is I'm going to tee up a couple of questions that is going to get you to start thinking about those things that you have questions about relative to this topic, questions in a corporate and or collegiate space. Several of these folks have played in both, so it's a unique opportunity. So we'll do a couple of questions, and we're going to do a Q&A, and then we're going to close with them predicting the future. So let's start with our section one, the first part of our discussion framework. We're going to look at things. We're going to start at the kind of the foundation and build up from there. We're going to share some strategies and lessons learned with building a skills-based workforce. We're going to ask the question, why all the focus on skills? So why is this such a big topic? And then how do you develop academic and employer collaboration? And then last but not least, look at technology. So let's take the first one. Why all this focus on skills? So folks, we've heard a lot about the value of skills assessments, certifications, credentials, and targeting skills development to address the needs of that future workforce. What strategies and or recommendations do you have on how to use skills assessments, certifications, credentials, and start targeted skills development? And then also, how has this or could this add value in higher education and or employers? Ian, do you want to start us off?
Sure, happy to do that. And thanks everybody for having me here today. I think the reason why there's so much focus on skills is really tied to the fact that that's ultimately what employers are looking to hire. Of course, you want to hire good people who are going to contribute to your culture, but any job description is really a list of the skills that are needed to execute certain outcomes. And the fact of the matter is that it's hard to find people with skills because there's really no way, there's no definitive catalog. You can't plug in anywhere and say, I'm looking for someone who can do A, B, and C, and give me the people who are in my market looking for a job who definitively have those qualifications. The other outcome, I think that the reason why it's a focus is education builds skills, but it doesn't necessarily build skills that are directly tied to jobs. And that would be an impossible job for our standard educational system. There are just the skills that are needed are fracturing. It is no longer math, science, writing, engineering. The types of jobs of today and the types of jobs tomorrow are requiring highly specific skills, and there are probably millions of them out there. So everybody's struggling to keep pace and to try and create a system where they can identify and find people with those skills. And that's requiring new infrastructure. That's requiring a new way of thinking. And I think a lot of what's going on at the summit is directly tied to that. How do you create a common language around that? How do you create some confidence that someone has the skills that they have? How does education keep pace with the need for skill development that is accelerating? And I think all of that goes into why it's such a focus.
Yeah. Tamara, we talked a little bit about this. And anything else to add, Tamara? And then I'll go to anybody else on the panel.
Yeah, no, thanks, Carol. You know, at FedEx, the way we look at this is we do a yearly kind of skills and competency assessment. We call it our future of work survey. It's aptly named, right? Because we all know that's coming. And we kind of ask leadership and our individual contributors to assess their efficacy towards skills, and skills that are also on the horizon that they're starting to see come, those that are arriving in the next 5 years. And then when we get into talent conversations too, we zoom out even a little bit further and we start to talk about, hey, in the next 10 to 15 years, what is that going to look like for skills and competencies so that we can disrupt in that space, right? Because it's more than just thinking about being disrupted. Now you have to think about how you disrupt. And I think that gives us the ability to target development. A great example of something that we've done at FedEx is our LIFT program, or Learning Innovation for Tomorrow. We target skills gaps, but what we do once we find them is we do an even deeper dive and requirements gathering with the business, because I don't think the business always knows how to ask for what they need and how to identify it. So we kind of help them through that conversation so we can curate some really specific learning to them, and then initiate that peer-to-peer learning that needs to happen too, so that you hand knowledge down and through the workforce. What we're focused on now really is data literacy. We do a lot of work with data analytics and data science. We're looking at robotics and UX, UI, and even project management is a skill that cycles in different ways, right? Right now it's very agile. Before it was very PMP. And I think too often we take these kind of general trends and try and fit those into these targeted areas. But people are really, really busy. And if you want them to take the time to learn and to engage with learning, then you've got to make sure that learning is highly relevant to them, that it's really connected to their career and development goals, and that it's priced in an attainable way. And then, of course, also that it's aligned with where the business is going. And I think when you do those things well, then you start to have an organization that upskills well.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you. Anybody else on the panel? Do you want to weigh in on this one?
Sure, Carol.
Think about skills.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I couldn't agree more with what we've already discussed, but I can amplify a couple of points. From the employer standpoint, the hiring process is certainly in part about skills, but its second part, it's about fit. Because if it was just skills, then I think the hiring process would be very different from what we experience today and what primarily hasn't changed for the last few decades. The big disconnect here, though, is that employers don't really understand what skills they already possess within their workforce. And they still have dated models of what skills they think they need or that the applicants need in order to do the job. So there's a big mismatch that's going on as well. And it's also about a $15 billion industry that employers are feeding in retraining and development to build new skills or to upskill their staff that they're getting out of the different higher education institutions. So when you think about skills, it varies so much from job to job and profession to profession. And we sometimes think that just because we give people the tools, that somehow the skills come along with it. You could give me all the carpentry tools in the world. I still can't build a great piece of furniture. That takes skill. And employers still aren't really great at assessing how skilled someone is. So they may have completed a course, but how skilled are they? And how accomplished are they? What kind of experience they have? How have they demonstrated those skills? I think is really what the conversation is all about in the hiring process. So it's core. It's core to the work that has to get done and how does it get done. But our assessment around it, the way in which we evaluate it and how good we are at doing that as employers, I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm hearing, Patty, did you have something else too?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would add on to that, to Rick's comments that, what you want to do is be able to get the right training to the right people at the right time in an affordable way. And I think, the skills assessment can help us achieve that. And certainly there are many assessments out there, but at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that the employees get what they need and that we're able to impact business in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So over to you, Carol.
Excellent point. it's, let me just kind of summarize what everybody said so we can say, why all this focus on skills. You've heard it from multiple different voices. There's this it creates a common language. I might define competencies for my particular job description or job role. That competency is not transferable from one business to another. When I'm supposed to give that competency to an employer, an employee. So skills is this least common denominator. If you've done, like math, remember did math, least common denominator. If we have a bunch of skills and we say, and then that drives both the employer has the same language, the current or future employee has the same language, and the educational institutions using the same common denominator. Then that, from a learning perspective, we learn to skills, experiential learning is going on. And then this is why, we're looking at credentials and stuff. So you guys are all, I think we all said it, it creates that least common denominator. Let's jump into kind of this employee-employer collaboration. I was able to participate in a couple of the sessions so far. If you look at the agenda for this summit, it is massively, amazingly diverse in terms of both a corporate and a collegiate academic or employer collaboration going on. What I want to do is, because we have a panel of folks from both, I'd like to look at this. How do you develop those academic and employer collaboration skills? So you have skills. How do you collaborate amongst two different institutions, types of institution, the employer and an academic institution, to help develop those with this least common denominator? How are we going to develop it in a collaborative way? So as we look at skills development, kind of at a macro level, we're going to take it up a little bit. We're seeing the need for higher education and employers to collaborate more on skills assessments and skills outcomes, like measure them. What do you see as the benefits of collaboration to address this needs of the current and future workforce? Tamara, do you want to tee us up or start us off on that one?
Yeah, Carol, I think it comes back to, I tell my team all the time that we can do anything, but we can't do everything, right? And in so many ways, with the future of work accelerating and skills changing as rapidly as they are, that's coming at us really fast as employers and from a corporate perspective. It's almost like one of those good thriller movies where you have that little ticking time bomb device that's moving the action. And I think all employers feel that urgency right now. What is the proverb? Like, the best tree is the one you planted 20 years ago, but the next best tree is the one you plant today. And I think that's where a lot of us are. But it's such positive time for collaboration between business and higher ed, because there's so much that we can do together, and it's a really pressing reason to do so. And then I think that as you look at how many times people's skill sets are going to change across, say, a 20-year career, I mean, they're going to cycle time after time. So anything that we do together is also iterative. It's not a one and done. We can continue to mold it because people are really going to have to be lifelong learners. So I think the key to it is really adaptability on both sides, on the business side and higher education side. We can have a tendency to kind of get stuck in our ways and a little bit intractable and bring kind of a very formulaic look to how we solve problems. And we have to think differently, to solve those problems. My experience with higher ed and coming along on the journey has been that when we listen for understanding to one another to address the problem, what we end up creating is something that's highly marketable to this employer. But, like you're going to hear from Patty too, a lot of us are facing the exact same problems, and you're going to find that this has a place in the market for a lot of other employers too. So that's what I would say.
Now, you did some work with a local university, didn't you, Tamara?
Yeah, we have a wonderful partnership with the University of Memphis for our LIFE program. It's Learning Inspired by FedEx. And we started talking to them about this really, Carol, to solve the problem of turnover that we were having at our hubs. But what we ended up putting together was the possibility of a no out-of-pocket direct bill solution for our entry-level employees to get a 4-year degree. And they can get admission without the ACT or the ACT. And I think what's poignant about what we did together is the way that we do all of that, the way that we give people without a lot of academic experience the ability to enter a 4-year university without taking those kind of interest assessments, because we're talking about assessment a lot today, is that the University of Memphis created something they call the Life Prep Academy. The Life Prep Academy teaches writing skills. It teaches those kind of, how do you use time management and things like that. These are skills that are going to translate through an employee's entire career. They also get them ready for college too. And then there's 12 hours that they transfer onto their transcript once they're admitted. And so I think what's amazing about that is it does a couple of things. It opens the door for people who that door was closed not a long time ago. And so when we start to think about equity and really creating that as a verb, it helps us with that too. But the University of Memphis has also been able to take the Life Prep Academy solution and use it with hospitals and to nursing programs and other places. So it's another one of those programs. It's not a one and done. When we solved FedEx's problem, the University of Memphis was able to go and solve other people's problems as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else want to jump in?
I love the excitement and enthusiasm around the opportunity for the collaboration between academia and employers. It may be harder to scale, but the effectiveness of those two bodies working closely together, just like what Tamara explained, and I've seen it in my own experience, where you have this deep collaboration, particularly when there's disruption. We talk about skills and needs changing all the time. I'll give you one quick example. When the media industry is still going through massive disruption, and the and news and journalism was changing, what was happening in the marketplace versus what was being created and produced out of the academic institutions for journalism majors, there was a big disconnect. So schools were investing a lot of money in these journalism programs that weren't producing graduates with the skills that were necessary for today's journalism and today's marketplace. So we worked very closely with many of the journalism programs across the organization to actually help them build a curriculum, and then created co-op programs and internship programs that had the mutual benefit of them creating a learning experience that was rich, rewarding, and would give them valuable skills to make them marketable. And it allowed us to have a pipeline of talent, and it created that connection. And that's happening more and more today. And I think it needs to happen more and more. The one area where I think can build a bridge between the two is, as you mentioned, Tamara, the Life Prep, and every university calls it something different, whether it's the traditional career development office or a Life Prep. What we need is more consistency across education and across employers at that level, where we are helping students make the transition, and what they've learned, and whatever the focus is for that academic institution. Because I do worry that we're going to move too much to everyone being like a trade educational environment. And there's nothing wrong with any institution that is designed for that purpose, but every institution shouldn't be created in that way. And so where there are gaps in whatever the academic focus is for that institution, where there are gaps in how that person is then prepared for the job market, there should be that function with the people who are experienced and well-versed in how to make those connections. And that's where I think the employers can help universities in building out that transitional department that helps students make the less of a leap and more of a logical next step from what they're producing at the university, what they're learning, and how to take that to a job right out of college.
Yeah, exactly. So, you heard it from these folks again. So when we talked about that first thing, why this focus on skills, it creates this least common denominator, that math piece. So if everybody's kind of operating on this kind of skills model, kind of common language, that collaboration, Tamara said, you can't do it all. So let me put my corporate hat on for a minute. I actually started a subsidiary of Liberty Mutual in Ireland. We need to build the organization from 0 to 150 people in less than a year. So I went over to Queen's University and I said, tell me what skills you get. So I wanted to, so that collaboration, if you have a common denominator of skills and the higher education institution is operating on that and the employer is operating that, you have a common language. I was able to hire people very, very quickly because I knew exactly what skills they had, and vice versa. That collaboration isn't just from higher education, you know, like when I was 18 to 22 and I move into employment, it also can go backward. So there's this, you now be in that collaborative vein when you have skills as a common set of language. I can use, back to Tamara and Greg's statement, you can't do it all. Higher education can't do it all. An employer can't do it all. But if you have a common language, an individual can move back and forth, and then the individual perspective, they can have a very personalized onboarding and learning experience, because we can go from one to another. I see we're getting, you know, a lot more collaboration going on. Good learning is good learning. I don't care where it comes from, and if we use skills as a model. So thank you guys. That's just kind of a summary of what we said. Let's move to how can technology help enhance this collaboration? So vision this for a minute. I know you guys all have thousands of questions. Hopefully you're posting those in about 4 minutes. We're going to open it up for a lot of different questions. So when you look at that common denominator, you say, okay, I have a bunch of skills. Well, how do I develop those skills? They change quickly. Where am I going to get the resources? We're going to have the design and development experience. I can go to higher education, go back and forth, create a personalized learning experience, onboarding experience. It is not easy. So let's look at how technology can help enhance that collaboration. So the use of technology can help us enable and enhance that collaboration amongst higher education, employers, as well as individual employees. The challenge we have is we need to have a set of standards, like we are using skills as a common language. We also need to have kind of a standard taxonomy of how we collaborate. You know, me sitting at Queen's University with 16 professors figuring out what skills, that's not scalable, folks, you know. So one of the reasons why IMS Global is actually hosting this summit, and one of the big projects that we're working on is called the Talent Continuum. It's looking at data standards associated with digital credentials and badging and stuff like that. So that's one, you know, challenge, is if we don't have standards to collaborate, so you don't all have to sit in Queen's University with a pen and a bunch of folks for 4.5 hours. Let's talk a little bit about how technology can enhance that collaboration, standards being one of them. Ian, I think you raised your hand to tee this one up first.
Sure. Yeah, I think in order for anything to, let me put it this way, I think innovation in technology comes when you hit a critical scale. So when I think of the standards, is essentially support scale. They allow people to transact in a common manner who didn't sign a contract to transact in that way. You know, when you created standards on online advertising, for example, for in the early days of banner advertisements, what would the standard sizes be? All of a sudden, you know, an advertiser knew they had to create 5 or 6 different types of banner ads, and they'd be able to call any publisher in the world and work with them. That's what we're looking to do with skills and education, is create a way for people to find each other, work with each other without having to put a lot of thought into the format or way that happens. And when it comes to collaboration, I'm really excited about how marketplaces can play a role. So for example, at ZipRecruiter, we are now empowering job seekers to import pre-certified credentials to their profile so that we can analyze those for the skills that it means that they have and help them find jobs that they're qualified for and apply to. If you create a structure around that, and we tap into the standards that the industry is making and provide a lot of scale around that, then you can start to innovate on top. You can start to build a lot of features. You can start to measure the quality of these certifications, which one help you get a job. You can then connect to the HR systems within a company and say, what are the common credentials or skills that people have earned that help them advance in their careers? And that's where the collaboration gets interesting, is if you can track from education to skill assessment to finding a job, to how you excel in that job over time, information can be shared back in a virtuous cycle that will allow the starting point, the education and the skill development, to be optimized based off end outcomes. And so that's, I think, the power of standards, is they create a language that a whole ecosystem or even multiple ecosystems can use to communicate with each other. And then technology can be the way to measure outcomes that make everybody involved in the chain smarter.
Remember SCORM, you know, if we didn't have SCORM compliant learning content, we wouldn't all be able to click on buttons and listen to videos and learning. Awesome point. Standards create that common language. Anybody else want to weigh in on, you know, what's this, how can technology enhance collaboration? And then we'll jump to questions. Okay, let's use some questions. Sandra, I think Mark's over there. What kind of questions do we have? Hopefully we inspired a lot of people to have really great questions. You have an amazing panel. Let's go for it.
We do have a couple questions that have come in. The first question that came in is, how are you assessing skills? What is the best tool or set of tools for pre-assessment and post-assessment?
So I'll start that if it's okay, Carol. There are a lot of assessments out there, but things are specific to what you're looking at. And so what we've started doing is, you know, we'll use a framework like ONET to start to look at skills, but then we start to ask those questions. And then year after year, as we do it, we're on our third year now of really asking those questions. We refine and ask a better question as the data comes in, and we let the data help us to refine and ask better questions that are specific to the workforce at FedEx, and sometimes just specific to different workforces that we're dealing with. And I'll give you an example. You know, we talked about the LIFE program where we're talking about building skills and competencies for our frontline employees, but I also have engineers who have graduate degrees and don't need another degree, but they might need to upskill from using Microsoft Excel into SAS, and from SAS into Python, and from Python into R, and that's a very different type of skill building, right? And so there are very specific questions that I want to ask there. And so we've done this internally, and we've been intentional with that so that we can continue to refine the data that we're getting and ask the next best question.
The thing I would like to add is it also depends on the type of hiring you're doing, right? If you're hiring at scale, then you need technology to help you scale those solutions and that process. Otherwise, it becomes completely, and for many employers it is right now, completely inefficient. But when you're not hiring at scale and you're hiring for individual critical roles, it's still the common method within most employers to use the traditional model for assessing someone's skill and ability. And that is, you do a round of interviews, you check references, you think about how else you can network to find out how the person has performed previously, because that's a pretty good indicator of how someone's going to perform in the future. So there are different tiers of hiring that go on at employers. So I think where you're going to see the more immediate and more earlier adoption will be in the kinds of roles and the kinds of large employers that are hiring at scale. But when you're not, you know, I know a lot of employers thought that something like any of the big job boards were great. Because it allowed them to have access to talent from all over the country. And then they would post a job and they would get 2,000 applications, and they're only looking to fill 1 or 2 jobs. And then they quickly came to realize that the technology actually wasn't helping them in that situation, because
Ian's smiling over there.
They needed more technology to help them filter out the 2,000 applications. So we need different technology for different levels of recruitment and skills assessment. And I think that's the big shift that's going to go on at employers for the next 10 years.
Greg, I think you just teed that up for Ian's.
I did.
I think he's got a solution. Go with it, Ian.
I'll comment that I agree with that. I mean, I think technology is really good at doing what it asks you to do. If you say, I want to advertise my job posting to attract applicants, and and that's, I want to do that at an efficient price point, technology can deliver that. It can get you 2,000 candidates. If you ask it for, I want, to only receive candidates who have these qualifications, it can do that. If you ask technology to say, sort through these 2,000 applications I have and help my recruiter figure out the 20 they should focus on, it can do that. So it's really about making sure that you start with the right questions of what you're trying to accomplish and find the technology that can do that, rather than just, kind of assuming a one size fits all solution. So I completely agree with Greg.
Yeah. So I'm going to sound like a broken record, and I'm going to, see if anybody else wants to weigh in on this. So the question was, how do you define skills? How do you do skills assessment? So I'm going to take it in two parts. Defining skills, Tamara talked a little bit about this. You can use ONET. Oh my gosh, have I sat in rooms with a bunch of people and took competency statements. So I'm taking my employer hat for a second, and I'll take my higher education hat. So the employer hat, we define all these competencies. There's these lovely little statements, and they basically say, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities of this particular role? So we took every single competency statement and broke it down into skills. Like it was like shopping. It was like putting everything in a little cart. I take my higher education hat on. You typically use kind of professional organizations to define competency models. Remember, now we're not talking about skills anymore, we're talking about competencies. For instance, I don't know, if you're an HR person, there's the SHRM competency model. So higher education will often take models from professional organizations and place them and then train to them. So the challenge is competencies are all these lovely statements. Remember, we talked about least common denominator. So you got to get you first need to define it, my 2 cents, define it in a skills matrix, if you will. That in itself is a challenge, but you take it one by one. Like the Python, somebody that knows Python might be able to know C, right? So yeah, an IT person. So you need to define that, use whatever way you have and convert them to skills, in my 2 cents. Then how do you assess those skills? I worked at a, quote, large financial services company, and we did some self-assessments. So you can pop it into work, like a learning management system or a human capital management system, have people self-select their level of that skill. Or you can have some sort of an assessment, like a test, or you have them do some experiential learning. This happens in higher education as well. What there's their proficiency level. The nice thing about that is if you have this common denominator of skills, as an employer or as an educational institution, you're saying, what level of skill am I training to or trying to assess to? The nice thing about that is that if I have an undergraduate degree in XYZ, I should have a bunch of skills. An undergraduate degree is going to have a level of learning. A graduate degree is going to have a higher level of learning. A doctorate degree is going to have a higher level of learning. So then if I'm an employee, the same applies. What level of proficiency of those skills? So I think how you assess them depends on how much rigor you want to do in terms of understanding what level of proficiency somebody has. But
I also think, if I can just add one more quick
Please.
thing, it depends on the type of skills you're trying to assess. It's a lot easier to assess hard skills than softer skills. So if I'm hiring a technologist and I need certain coding skills, that's a lot easier than in many other roles where the skills you're hiring for are harder to measure and harder to measure objectively. So, and I think that's a huge challenge.
Agreed. Sandra, any other questions?
We do.
Sorry,
we have
Patty.
a couple more questions. So the next question is, when it comes to making graduates more discoverable to employers and great opportunities more discoverable to graduates who deserve access to them, what are the keys higher ed can do or mistakes not to make to serve our learners?
Awesome. Anybody want to tee that one up?
I'm happy to jump in from the perspective that I've gained at ZipRecruiter. I think how you cultivate the most opportunities for your students really starts with how you help that student communicate their value. So the best class I ever took in college was a business communications class where he went around and had everybody tell them their jobs that we all did before graduating high school. You know, you're talking about mowing lawns and delivering pizzas and typical high school jobs. And, you know, he would take a pizza delivery job and say, okay, so you were a point of sale, you were customer facing, you were the face of the company, you participated in company logistics. And it, you know, we're sophomores in college and everybody's mind's being blown. They're like, I thought I was just delivering pizzas. And he taught us how to communicate value, or at least to have some confidence in not underselling yourself. And I think that there are a lot of just ways to help college students with that. Help them present themselves via their resume, via how they interview, all of the things that career centers do. But I think that is becoming increasingly digital. And there is an increasing amount of technology that we were just talking about, assesses candidates, filters them out, and you kind of have to get through the bot layer to get to recruiters. So I think there's a huge service that can be provided to students into how to set up their LinkedIn profile, their career profile, their resume, all of these things to get through that blocker. And there are books written about this stuff that it's super interesting, but you have to optimize for today's environment. And then in terms of how to maximize their, you know, the employers that they can interact with, I think that's a two-pronged strategy. One is equipping them to go interact with in every marketplace they can, whether that's a career fair or, you know, a top job board, to inviting employers in and being able to invite employers in without asking them to do a lot of work. So it would be really easy to go to some aggregators of job content and say, we'd love to access your employers and bring those jobs to our students digitally, rather than individually calling every single one and trying to scale what a career center does as a service. Actually offer that through technology and just bring those jobs into your environment and allow students who are now prepared to digitally represent themselves as well as possible to apply to those jobs. That's my tech hat. But that's how I think about it.
Well, that was your passion, Ian, so I'm
Right.
glad. We have time for one more person to respond to that question, or maybe another question. Anybody on the panel, do you want to have a response to that last question?
I'm happy to jump in. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please do.
I was gonna, so I agree completely with Ian. How you tell your story will serve you at every stage of life and career, and being able to tell your story. I see too many, particularly recent college grads, come out and they're almost embarrassed to think about how they promote themselves, how they differentiate themselves, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. You know, what's on the resume isn't what we're hiring. It's then how you're presenting and telling your story. I think that's critical. The other piece of this that is networking, but not in the technological sense, but in the relationship sense, is how wide a network does the educational institution create with alumni and with their employer sort of partners that they're close to, and then how connected do they make their students and how do they plug them into that network? I think when we think about alumni and the sort of the network effect of all of the alumni and then all of their network and all the jobs they're in and all the different levels, the pathway to jobs is, I think, particularly since it's one of the most effective ways to get more effective hiring, is through a referral.
Yeah, agreed.
That's where if they build out that network, they would serve their students really well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, thank you. We are going to jump into the future. So we have less 1 minute. Who wants to predict the future? You have about 15 seconds if each one of us do a prediction. Who wants to predict the future?
I'll jump in, Carol.
Please.
I think that we've talked a lot about how quickly the future is coming at us. But I think that what's really going to happen is that as those future skills come out, then it's going to move people up the value chain. So where we used to input data, now we're going to interpret data. And so I think the people who are going to be really, really impacted by that are those entry-level jobs that are inhabited by women and minorities often. So I think it's critical that we think about this now. I think it's critical that we think about how to take our employees with us, and that we upskill and not just hire our talent. So that's one thing. One of the things I think it's important with is not just working with higher education, but also partnering with even high schools in the area to start to just competency walk those STEAM programs and some of that kind of stuff to help students be adaptable and ready for jobs that are going to be there when they get out of school, or even when they get out of college, but start to see and understand that.
Awesome. We could talk all day. Thank you, guys. I think we're out of time, but please connect up with us via LinkedIn. We look forward to connecting up with you and continuing this conversation. More to come. We appreciate your time today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. Have a good